Hello and welcome to Alden Carrow's Poetry Podcast. I'm Alden Carrow, poet, walker and author of Cumbria in Verse, Lakes to Fells in Poetry, which is available to buy at Amazon. This is a podcast for people who suspect, as I do, that the world is moving too quickly and that something quietly extraordinary waits for anyone willing to slow down, listen closely and pay proper attention to it. In every episode, I share two poems. The first is a guest poem from the wider world of verse, something that has stayed with me or troubled me or refused to let me go. The second is one of my own, drawn from the fells, the coast, the weather and the strange beauty of ordinary days. And for your chance to win a signed copy of Cumbria in Verse, Lakes to Fells in Poetry, I invite you to suggest a future guest poem by emailing me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That's aldencarrow78@gmail.com. The next guest poem will come from one of you. Today we find ourselves at a peculiar intersection of geology and psychology. The theme of this episode is one I can't stop turning over. The mountain needs no audience, the poem does. A mountain, huge, indifferent, ancient, is a complete entity whether or not a human eye is there to witness it. Its erosion, its freezing and thawing, its slow geological labour, all happen in a vacuum of observation. The bedrock shatters in the dark, whether anyone climbs it or not. But a poem is a bridge. It's an act of reaching out from one mind to another, an attempt at company across the silence. Without an ear to hear it, or an eye to read it, is a poem truly complete? Is it even fully alive? We're going to sit with that question, beginning in absolute stillness, with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, listening to frost form on the windows of a quiet cottage, and then climbing in the second half onto the dark Ordovician slate of Skiddaw, where 500 million years of geology is snapping in the dark, with no one there to hear it. So pour something warm, settle in. The wind is up, and there's poetry to be found. To begin our journey today, I've selected a poem that is perhaps the finest example of what we call conversation poetry. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Frost at Midnight was written in February 1798. At the time, Coleridge was living in a small cottage in Nether Stowey, Somerset. It was a time of deep personal reflection, and the poem captures a moment of profound silence and domestic intimacy. The poem is a meditation on the relationship between the human mind and the natural world, a theme that sits at the very heart of our discussion today. Let me share the full text with you now. The frost performs its secret ministry, unhelped by any wind. The owlet's cry came loud, and hark, again, loud as before. The inmates of my cottage, all at rest, have left me to that solitude which suits abstruse research, save that at my side my cradled infant slumbers peacefully. 'Tis calm indeed, so calm that it disturbs and vexes meditation with its strange and extreme silentness. Sea, hill, and wood, with all the numberless goings-on of life, inaudible as dreams, the thin blue flame lies on my low-burnt grate, and quivers not. Only that film, which fluttered on the grate, still flutters there, the sole unquiet thing. Methinks its motion in this hush of nature gives it dim sympathies with me who live, making it a companionable form whose puny flaps and freaks the idling spirit by its own mood interprets, everywhere echo or mirror seeking of itself, and makes a toy of thought. But oh, How oft at school, with most believing mind, presageful, have I gazed upon the bars to watch that fluttering stranger, and as oft with unclosed lids, already had I dreamt of my sweet birthplace, and the old church tower, whose bells, the poor man's only music, rang from morn to evening, all the hot fair day, so sweetly that they stirred and haunted me with a wild pleasure, falling on mine ear most like articulate sounds of things to come. So gazed I, till the soothing things I dreamt lulled me to sleep, and sleep prolonged my dreams. And so I brooded all the following morn, awed by the stern preceptor's face, mine eye fixed with mock study on my swimming book, save if the door half opened, and I snatched a hasty glance, and still my heart leaped up, for still I hoped to see the stranger's face, townsman, or aunt, or sister more beloved, my playmate, when we both were clothed alike. Dear babe, that sleepest, cradled by my side, whose gentle breathings, heard in this deep calm, fill up the interspersed vacancies and momentary pauses of the thought. My babe so beautiful, it thrills my heart with tender gladness, thus to look at thee, and think that thou shalt learn far other lore, and in far other scenes. For I was reared in the great city, pent mid cloisters dim, and saw naught lovely but the sky and stars. But thou, my babe, shall wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores, beneath the crags of ancient mountain, and beneath the clouds which image in their bulk both lakes and shores and mountain crags. So shalt thou see and hear the lovely shapes and sounds intelligible of that eternal language which thy God utters, who from eternity doth teach himself in all, and in all things in himself. Great universal teacher, he shall mould thy spirit, and by giving make it ask. Therefore all seasons shall be sweet to thee, whether the summer clothe the general earth with greenness, or the redbreast sit and sing betwixt the tufts of snow on the bare branch of mossy apple tree, while the nigh-thatch smokes in the sun-thaw, whether the eave-drops fall heard only in the trances of the blast, or if the secret ministry of frost shall hang them up in silent icicles, quietly shining to the quiet moon. This poem is a masterclass in the secret ministry of the natural world. Coleridge begins in the dead of night. The world is asleep, but the frost is busy. It's working unhelped by any wind, a silent, invisible force that transforms the landscape. This is the ultimate example of the mountain needing no audience. The frost doesn't care that Coleridge is watching the grate. It doesn't care that the babe is sleeping. It performs its duty with a cold, divine indifference. Yet, look at what Coleridge does with this silence. He finds it disturbing. The extreme silence of the world vexes meditation. This is such a human reaction. When the world becomes too quiet, we begin to project our own internal noise onto it. He looks at the thin blue flame and the fluttering film on the grate, what was known in folklore as a stranger, and he sees it as a companionable form. He is seeking an echo or mirror of himself in the silence. As the poem progresses, we see Coleridge's mind wander back to his childhood at Christ's Hospital in London. He describes being pent mid cloisters dim, a stark contrast to the open landscapes of the Lake District that he would later call home. He remembers watching for the stranger at school, hoping for a visitor, a connection to the world outside the cold, grey walls of the institution. This longing for connection is the very essence of why we write. Even in his solitude, Coleridge is reaching out, first to his memories and then to his sleeping son Hartley. The turn in the poem, where he addresses the dear babe, is one of the most moving moments in English literature. He contrasts his own urban, restricted upbringing with the life he envisions for his son. Hartley will wander, like a breeze, by lakes and beneath the crags of ancient mountain. Here, the mountain becomes the great universal teacher. Coleridge posits that nature is an eternal language uttered by God. In this view, the mountain does have an audience. It is the divine itself, and we are merely students learning to read the script. The secret ministry of frost ends the poem by hanging up silent icicles, quietly shining to the quiet moon. It is an image of perfect, unobserved beauty. Yet, by writing the poem, Coleridge has ensured that it is observed. He has taken the silent, audience-less work of the frost and turned it into a shared human experience. He has bridged the gap between the indifferent mountain and the seeking human soul. The themes Coleridge explored in the quiet of his cottage are echoed in the physical reality of the landscape I often walk. Living in North Yorkshire, I'm never far from the bones of the earth. But for this next piece, I want to take you slightly further west, to the Lake District, to one of its oldest and most formidable giants, Skiddaw. Unlike the craggy, volcanic beauty of the Langdales or the Scaffolds, Skiddaw is a mountain of mudstone, dark, ancient, and constantly breaking. It's a mountain that is literally falling apart under the pressure of time and weather. Here is my poem, Skiddaw. The southern slope is a broad steepness of dark Ordovician mudstone, funneling our ascent onto a single abrasive line of compacted crushed stone. Heavy blocks are pitched into the gradient, stepped to manage the runoff and channel the boots. It is not a silent sentinel watching the Solway coast. It is an active zone of mechanical failure. At 900 metres, the temperature fluctuates around the freezing point, expanding water in the fissures, shattering the bedrock into angular shards. This debitage, flat fragments 2 to 20 centimetres long, is pulled constantly downward by gravity. Above the scree, the summit is erased by cloud, compressing the visible world to a radius of wet moss and the concrete pillar of Trig Point TP 6001. To the north, the treeless bowl of Skiddaw Forest holds 1,000 acres of saturated peat. The mass of it presses down on the bedrock, delaying the rainfall, releasing the water slowly into the catchment of the river Coldew. When the daylight falls, the traffic withdraws. Ice forms in the wet slate. 500 million years of geology snaps in the dark, sliding further down the scree. When I wrote this poem, I was thinking about the concept of mechanical failure. In engineering, that sounds like a disaster, but in geology, it's simply the way of things. Skiddaw isn't just sitting there, it's performing its own secret ministry, much like Coleridge's frost. The Ordovician mudstone, mentioned in the first stanza, is over 450 million years old. It predates the dinosaurs. It predates almost everything we recognise as the world. And yet, every night, when the temperature fluctuates around the freezing point, that ancient rock is snapping. It is becoming debitage, a term often used for the waste flakes left over from making stone tools, but here it refers to the mountain's own waste. I wanted to capture the sheer indifference of the mountain to our presence. We build paths, we pitch heavy blocks to channel the boots. We try to manage the runoff and make the ascent predictable. But the mountain is erasing the summit with cloud. It compresses our world to a radius of wet moss. On the top of Skiddaw, you aren't a conquering hero, you are a small, wet creature standing next to a concrete pillar of trig point TP 6001. That trig point is our attempt to mark the mountain, to give it a name and a number, to bring it into the human realm of data and mapping. But the mountain is busy with its own gravity, pulling its shards constantly downward. The final stanza is where the theme of the audience really comes home. When the daylight falls, the traffic withdraws. The hikers go back to their hotels in Keswick. The cars leave the car park at Laptrig. The mountain is left alone in the dark. And that is when the real work happens. Ice forms in the wet slate. 500 million years of geology snaps in the dark. The mountain doesn't need us to hear that snap. Doesn't need us to marvel at its age. It just is. Writing the poem is my way of acknowledging that indifference. It is my attempt to be an audience for something that doesn't want or need one. It's about the humility of standing before something so much older than our species and trying to find the words for its silence. This brings us to our discussion topic for today: live poetry readings and open mic nights. If the mountain needs no audience, why do we, as poets, feel such a desperate need for one? Why do we gather in the back rooms of pubs, in drafty village halls, or in hushed libraries to read our words aloud? There is a fundamental difference between the poem on the page and the poem in the air. On the page, the poem is a bit like the mountain. It exists, it is structured, it has its own internal geology. But when it is read aloud, it becomes a living thing. It requires a listener. In the Yorkshire poetry scene, which I'm proud to be a part of, the open mic night is a sacred ritual. Whether it's a crowded room in Leeds or a quiet gathering in a North York Moors village, there is an electricity that happens when a person stands up, paper shaking in their hand, and says, "I have something to tell you." So why do we do it? Well, for one, poetry is an oral tradition. Long before it was Ordovician mudstone on a page, it was breath. It was the rhythm of the voice echoing the rhythm of the heart and the feet. When we read live, we are tapping into that ancient lineage. We are testing the mechanical strength of our words. Does the metaphor hold up when it's spoken? Does the rhythm carry the listener through the saturated peat of the more difficult stanzas? But more than that, the audience provides a witness. In my poem about Skiddaw, I talk about the summit being erased by cloud. Often the act of writing can feel like being in that cloud. You are alone with your moss and your trig point. You aren't sure if your vision of the world is visible to anyone else. The audience is the sun that burns off that cloud. When you read a line and you hear a collective intake of breath, or a quiet of agreement, or even the clink of a glass that punctuated a silence just right, you know you have been seen. The mountain might be fine with its shards snapping in the dark, but the human soul craves a witness to its own internal fractures. Open mic nights are particularly special because they are democratic. You have the seasoned pro reading from their latest collection, followed by the person who has never read in public before, sharing a poem they wrote on the back of a bus receipt. There is a vulnerability there that is incredibly moving. It's a space where we agree for a few hours to pay attention. In a world that is constantly trying to distract us, giving someone your undivided attention while they share their inner landscape is a radical act of love. I remember a reading I did as a 10-year-old boy at Harrogate Conference Centre. I was reading a poem about the sea, another entity that needs no audience. The auditorium was silent, the kind of silence Coleridge described, that extreme silentness that disturbs and vexes. I felt the weight of it, but as I reached the final lines, I realised the audience wasn't just listening, they were participating in the silence. They were the quiet moon to my silent icicles. In that moment, the poem wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the room. We need audiences because poetry is a collaborative act. The reader provides the words, but the listener provides the space for those words to land. Without the listener, the poem is just compacted, crushed stone. With the listener, it becomes the abrasive line that leads us somewhere new. We might be shattering our bedrock into angular shards when we write about our pain or our joy, but sharing it makes those shards part of a path that someone else can walk. So to anyone who has ever stood up at an open mic, thank you. You are doing the brave work of turning the secret ministry of your private thoughts into a public gift. You are proving that while the mountain might be content in its solitude, we find our meaning in the connection. We find our poetry in the shared breath of a room full of strangers. And so we come to the end of another walk together. We've stood with Coleridge in his cottage, listening to frost performing its secret ministry in the dark, and we've climbed the dark mudstone of Skiddaw, where the geology breaks in silence, whether or not we are there to hear it. But the poem, as we said tonight, is the other thing. The poem needs an audience. The poem is a bridge. So now I would love to hear from you. If there is a poem you would like featured in a future episode, a classic, something modern, or a personal favourite you've carried with you for years, please email me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That's aldencarrow78@gmail.com. Every suggestion is entered into the draw for a signed copy of Cumbria in Verse, Lakes to Fells in Poetry, sent to you by hand. The next guest poem will come from one of you, and that is precisely how I want this podcast to work, not as a broadcast across the silence, but as a bridge built in both directions. So thank you for listening, for slowing down with me, and for being the audience the poem requires. Until next time, may you find the poetry waiting for you in the everyday, and I look forward to speaking to you again on Wednesday.